Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to the 13th in the entire module series of Marketing Management, a VUCA perspective. We are dealing with fundamentals of marketing management, and I am your friend and guide through this entire journey, Siddhi Prad Bhattacharya. Now, in this particular journey, we have looked at a lot of things from the VUCA markets outside, how market forces act on organizations. We've walked a mile or two in the consumer's shoes, and we've started delving into how businesses interact with other businesses and therefore the business market aspect of things. We have taken it up to a fair extent, and now we are getting into a case study in this particular conversation, but before that a little more on business markets will be spoken of. We start with this little quote from a South African consultant and marketing thinker who says, money flows in the direction of value. That is a succinct version of how businesses interact with each other. The moment one business is able to provide a, it attracts the kind of money that it's wanting prospect or converted customer. In order to reach this market plan, and the best tool they have at hand is the know-how to go about planning for success in markets where and they need to ensure that their information is in place beforehand, and so that they can actually tap into the capabilities that they can offer to their prospects, and the prospect or the customer they have on board, they see that particular value coming from them. So, customer tropes again help in achieving that kind of success, and when it comes to corporate customers, knowing what the needs are of that particular prospect or customer helps the business market to them even better. Which brings us to the Southern Pumps public tender case study, but like we spoke of, we will cover a little bit more about business markets and their functioning before we jump into the case. Now, business to business marketers are using every single possible marketing tool at their disposal to attract and retain customers. They are embracing selling systems, and they are also adding valuable services to their product offerings, and they are using reference programs, because if one happy customer goes and talks about that particular product or service that they have received to other similar minded, similarly inclined customers in their network, it comes from a trusted source, and hence the chances of conversion are far higher. And they are utilizing a wide variety of online as well as offline communication, because at the end of the day, if you have achieved something, you must go ahead and talk about it. So, the mix of online as well as offline communication helps them create that necessary branding and pushes their branding activities forward. Although marketing communication is usually associated with consumer markets, it also plays an important role in business markets as well, and companies need to inform business customers about the benefits of their offerings as well as coordinating their activities with collaborators. So, it is a holistic approach to marketing and the communications that backs up that particular marketing activity set. With that in mind, let us try and understand how we can manage communication for business markets. Now, the entire activity of maintaining and managing relations within a marketing construct is central to managing that business market as well. What is the role in business to business marketing for communication to play. Communication plays a pivotal role in all aspects that are marketing. So, therefore, the importance in business markets cannot be doubted at all. You have to inform your customers about what you are bringing to the table, and you are coordinating with collaborators to streamline the operations like we spoke of. Alongside that, you are nowadays seeing a constant shift to online platforms, which means that the communication that you are putting out is aligned to the customer need using SEO. You remember we have spoken of disposition. So, disposition showcases that a particular customer, now in this case it is a business customer, they already have a need, or at least they are actively searching for an answer to a problem they may have. They need a solution, and hence mapping that disposition to search enabled optimized conversations, ads, etc., and search engine marketing helps the brand connect with its buyers. And usage of social media, where you can actually publish this, typically in this case more usage of corporate and professional social media like LinkedIn, at times YouTube, and to an extent if you have got production and content heavy stuff, and maybe in the film space, then maybe even Vimeo and such like is something people use. And then they call people over for something like a webinar, where they can talk about their particular product in detail. They can also get into podcasts, where they can have a conversation with subject matter experts, with other clients who have worked with that particular brand and have found success in their association. And this is all steps that can be used to enhance the kind of communication that can be dished out. Now, when you are adopting your B2C strategies into B2B marketing, what are the areas of play that come into mind? So, we will take a small caselet here. Xerox has an integrated campaign program, through which what they do is they integrate their business services focus. So, they tell out loud that we are focused towards businesses also. It is not an individual buy of a machine, they can provide holistic services for a business to adopt, and that comes to them with a specific package of machines, software suites and end solutions. Now, this was, for example, an ad which they put out where they showcased their partnership with Marriott, the group of hotels, and they showcased the invoice process being automated thanks to Xerox's indoctrination into Marriott systems. The highlights for this were efficiency and customer focus. Customer in this case is Marriott actually. Their lives become easier so that they can take the hassle of printing invoices away and focus more on their core competency, which is keeping their guests feel welcome throughout. So, the key message here was Xerox enables clients to focus on their core business. Again, you have business clients coming to the hotel. So, Xerox enables that particular hotel to attend to their core business, which is meeting the and keeping the customer happy at their end, and they give automatic processes through which they can actually deliver that kind of a promise. Now, in this particular case, the purchases are of a fairly high order. Because these are of a certain high stakes value, so these transactions start to matter, because if you do a fewer number of these transactions, you will still have met your sales target. So, therefore, personalization again becomes important. You need to know who you are talking to, you need to understand the individual challenges, and how are you going to go about ensuring that you deliver on the promises, or at least the kind of presentation that you have made, that I can actually provide a variety of things to you. So, those things have to be made good upon. Big ticket purchases like this, where the figures actually run to 6 or 7 figures, require that amount of trust, because it is riding on big money, and you need reliable information in terms of specs, in terms of the software suites, in terms of maybe even training and guides, which help people pick that particular machine and all that comes along with it. So, all the paraphernalia is picked up, the training is given, people start adopting to that new system, they also maybe at times require certain modifications. Those modifications are brought in because yes, it is a high net purchase. So, certain modifications are also always factored in by the organization trying to sell to a corporate client. Buyers value the insights from independent trusted sources. Why? Because these should not be more advertising which is intrusive in nature, but rather something that is verifiable out there in the public domain and spoken of with a certain honesty after usage. This allows them to understand that this is not just the brand speak, it is somebody who has genuinely bought and used that particular product or service, and these people therefore, if they are people who have a certain kind of weightage in the market, then these become trusted sources who can actually be looked upon to speak on these lines, and their word can be trusted. The key takeaway for marketers here is that you have to ensure that your communication becomes personal and you target communication which builds confidence and strengthens relationship in these high value B2B transactions. Now, how does a buyer supply relationship evolve from here? It is very important for corporate selling brands to actually foster such buyer seller relationships, because over time these are bound to get you repeat purchases, repeat maintenance on orders or contracts, and if you want to expand your services laterally or vertically, you have that capability to do so. Here you are to move beyond just making that one particular sale or transaction, and what you need to do is you should try and look towards creating value. How are you solving problems? This is a running refrain across all of marketing and sales also now. Solving problems and providing solutions. These are important because with these, brands can actually become much more reliable and trusted in the client's eyes. And when you do this at a through the line level, you are trying to create vertical coordination, and this gives stronger partnerships. What does vertical coordination mean? You are talking to, we had spoken of a variety of people who run the entire particular aspect of how purchasing works in an organization. So, if somebody has raised the request, they will want to be in on it because they are the ones who are going to see that it is fulfilled. Then there are users, people who will end up using it. There are procurement or purchase people, and all of their needs, wants and demands need to be addressed. If they have a certain protocol to follow, that needs to be looked into. If the users have certain challenges, those challenges must be met, and their word going upwards actually gets the person who has requested them to give you a repeat order. So, this person then gives you a repeat order and maybe expands the portfolio of products or services that you can provide to that particular organization. This vertical coordination helps you entrench yourself in that particular organization far, far better. So, key forces that shape these relationships are how many alternatives are available. The more number of alternatives available, the harder you have to work towards ensuring that the customer relationship stands the test of time. Then, how urgent or how important is the supply of what you are going to give them. If it is urgent, if it is critical, then you may have better leverage, but should you use that just to make that particular transaction sale, or would you like it to be showcasing your partnership with that particular organization? So, you develop a long term trust and a faith with them. The bond becomes better and they keep giving you longer term orders, bigger orders, etc., and they maybe even refer you. So, these are goodwill items which you can not purchase with any amount of money. This will give you benefits over time. Remember, we have talked about the actual shelf life of the customer. So, that means that if you are able to strike up a relationship, you are likelier to pet the golden goose rather than slay it and just get that one little egg. If you get the golden goose to come home, you will have golden eggs every single day for the rest of your foreseeable life and partnership with that person. Here, the organization. Again, how complex is the supply? Is it very difficult to get through to that supply? Are you able to break through that particular line? Are you able to provide them certain kinds of support systems, more malleable to their needs, something which is custom made in parts so that their people can use it better? Can it be branded with their branding in place, so you put out white labeled stuff? All of these factors start to matter to the organization you are trying to sell your goods to. And then there is the supply market dynamism as well. What if technology changes? What if the compliance levels change? What if policies at the government level change? What if supply of your products spare parts changes? There are lots of factors which are volatile. The VUCA factors do play a very strong role here. So, you have to keep these aspects in mind as well. Now, how do buyer supplier relationships evolve over time? At the most basic level, you will see there are routine exchanges with moderate cooperation between the buyer and the seller. So, this is very standard. The product you are selling is probably low engagement and it is pretty much commoditized, and the engagement is to ensure that the best rates and the highest quality and the continuous supply is ensured. So, this is low intensity, but it will be probably more frequent. Low intensity, high frequency. Collaborative partnerships require a higher amount of trust and commitment for deeper integration, and this typically happens with high intensity and more complex products and services. So, for example, if there is a telco which is taking from another telecom player or from another IT player something like a VAS control system or a master aggregator system, here there will be a high amount of trust required. There will be a commitment for deeper integration. You will probably have to deploy staff over there for integration for a longer period of time. You will have to train people, you will have to automate certain things, you will have to obviously create modules which manage their ways of working the way they have been working so far. You can't expect to change everything to how you have developed your particular output and your particular product. So, there is a lot of integration required here, and over time there will be shifts. Buyers may at times opt for basic supplier performance if the needs become simple, and suppliers may prioritize customers who give a higher growth potential. So, both ways dynamics may shift. You may see your priorities shifting from a particular prospect to another because they give you higher business growth, whereas a buyer, if they can do with a simpler interface than your complex one, will probably veer in that particular direction because it takes lesser time to implement and maybe even costs less. So, because of these factors, there could be shifts over time, which are things to keep an eye out for. Then there are key insights from research. This research comes in when close relationships are there and the supply is critical. So, if the supply is critical, you will try and understand what is it that is causing trouble at the client's end, and you will try and solve that particular problem. Again, if the procurement is complex with fewer alternatives, again you will try and solve the problem. The more entrenched you are, the more supportive you are, the higher your stature in their eyes as a supplier. So, therefore, in cases where high uncertainty amongst the VUCA aspects, uncertainty comes into play here. The high uncertainty necessitates vertical coordination through proper planning and an information exchange between both parties. They need to know what you can provide, what the specs are, how much of it can be modular, how much of it can be custom made, and you need to understand from them what their exact end objectives are, and you can create a path, a journey which can take the entire experience to its intended conclusion. Now, when you are building corporate trust, you need to understand that a lot goes inside creating it, and you need to understand the nature of trust, and so do the people who are front facing staff, typically your marketers as well as your sales team. What actually constitutes trust is a firm's willingness to rely on a business partner. If you are that worthy business partner, then they will start relying on you, and this can be influenced by a variety of things, like you have to see what kind of competence you are able to showcase. If you are showcasing your integrity and honesty, and you are also showing kindness, you are showing benevolence, you are not there like a vulture waiting to strip them of their meat, of their bones, but actually seeking to cultivate a long term relationship. So, in their moment of need, if you stand by them, you will gain the respect for a longer period of time. So, that is something which needs to be thought through by marketers, especially in the B2B scenario. Again, the more integrated you are, the better personal interactions you have with their hierarchy, and what past experience have been there with their firm regarding your supplies, the people from your side. Those things will also entrench that particular trust heavily with that particular client. And how you can build trust further? You provide full information very honestly and upfrontly, so that they are aware of what they are buying into at what particular price. Also here, it gives you a particular advantage when you come to tell them about negotiated prices, because negotiations always happen. If you are to fall down to a certain discounted price, you can tell them that so much and no further. Why you can stick to your guns in this particular case? Because you have provided the full and honest information. So, therefore, they know that this is exactly how you have priced it, this is how you have padded your profits to it, and this is a certain operating margin that you have kept. Not necessary to disclose everything, but you give them a certain fair price understanding of things. You do not need to tell them exact breakdowns of how you managed it, but they can go and compare this out there in the market and see that you have actually given them an honest pricing, and for which the kind of support, the kind of temperament, the kind of attitude which you bring to the table is far superior to whatever else is available in the market. Again, especially for the marketing and sales teams, if you align the employee incentives with customer needs, so your employees are focused on solutions. They take the customer needs, they understand the problem well, and they solve those problems. Then you have got employees who are giving that kind of output, and they are giving that kind of trust in the longer run to your prospect or your client. Partners with customers who create market value. This always happens when you see that out of the entire exercise of having sided with one particular supplier, the client feels that at the end of the day, I have received a better product, I have received better in time, the price has been fair, and I am able to put it to use in my own organization's requirements. So, you are able to create better, more timely, and often a very fairly priced output of your own, and that gives you market value at the end of the day, because your end customers finally end up buying you over other competition you may be facing as a client, and so therefore, the supplier becomes somebody crucial to your entire supply chain pipeline. And you also need to provide valid product comparisons with competitors. Why is this important? Is because it first and foremost gives you a differentiator. This allows you to showcase how you are different and how you are better than competition. So, that automatically sets you apart. These can have various facets. You can have better capabilities, you can have better specs, you can have aggressive pricing, you can have support, which is generally post sales, and you can also have the trust factor. Trust comes in through a lot of other people having used that particular product, you having worked with this particular organization for a long time. That starts to have a positive rub off on your brand overall. So, all of these facets come together and help you. Since nowadays the world is moving online, there are lots of challenges here, because at times in earlier days there would be interpersonal interactions where you would meet people by face. Here geographies separate you, timelines separate you, your physical challenges to travel separate you, and very many VUCA factors also separate you. So, which is why you need to understand that buyers will have trust concerns. How do you meet those trust concerns? Will the products which they probably may not have seen before they buy, especially in a new buy scenario, will they meet the stringent quality standards that they have set? The next part is accurate and timely delivery. Will the specs be met when the product is finally delivered? Will it meet the timeline in which that particular product is required to be delivered? In the flip scenario of this, the seller may have concerns as to payment reliability. Will I get paid, and will I get paid on time? And if there are credit limits for rolling business requirements, those credit limits also need to be appropriate. They can't be indefinite. They can't be indefinite. They have to be acceptable. So, it could be a 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, and these can be given out depending on the size of the order and the strength of the association that has already been running. And the solutions for these things could be automated credit checks. Now, these automated credit checks happen with online systems. You have online trust services, and these assess the credit worthiness of both parties, thereby making the process far more transparent and simple. Now, in this entire process, you will see with digital technology coming into play, a lot of new advents have come about. For example, you have got blockchain. This is extremely important when it comes to financial transactions, plus in terms of logistics and supply chain. So, in both these scenarios, you get to see blockchain taking over. The algorithms enable people to order in time automatically as per a certain contract. Also, because it is in something which is as stable as a blockchain, nobody can tamper with the data. So, there is transparency and there is automatic auditing. So, all of these things help. Blockchain today has become big and is set to even become bigger in the near future. Corporate wise, how do you manage your credibility and reputation? As a corporate, as a business entity, you have to ensure that the customer belief in your firm's ability to design and deliver products or services effectively cannot be disturbed. The corporate expertise is the first thing which is measured. Here people will check whether you actually have the ability to make and sell those certain expected quality in your products and services. Then corporate trustworthiness, this is showcased using the honesty, the dependability and the sensitivity. Here again it is about understanding customer needs, how much time you spend with them, how much you have understood where their needs are not being met, which is called need gap analysis. And then furthermore, how likable are you? Are you likable? Are you attractive? Are you prestigious? Have other brands partnered with you? Do you carry that certain go-getter attitude and that helpful, very, like we use that word, benevolent attitude? You are helpful, kind, you are always on the lookout for problems to solve, you are partnering with your clients to ensure that they are always receiving value at the entire end of things, and this showcases how dynamic you are. This kind of outward persona as a brand, is it exuded? Do your executives actually live that kind of a persona when they act? Are their actions also seen in that particular light? And this helps because credibility matters, and a credible firm is skilled at what it does. It keeps its customers' best interests in mind, and they are great to work with. They will come in, they will take care of things, and once you have called them in, you can rest assured that your work will get done. That assurance is extremely important, and it gives other corporates, your clients, the ability to rest easy and focus on what they need to get done, rather than focus on a supplier who is all over the place. And which is why, to ensure this, you have to ensure that the risks are minimized in that customer and supplier relationship. How do you do these things? There should not be tensions in the relationships. You can do this by balancing a certain safeguarding, and you can ensure that there is a certain predictability to the business, and you can adapt also. There are certain times when outside factors may come in. So, you need to have certain amount of flexibility, so that you can operate despite external factors, which could be from the VUCA space. And these factors, even if they give you a jolt, you are prepared and ready and nimble enough to manage with other capabilities around that particular scenario. Again, vertical coordination, which means like how we have discussed in the past, your procurement, your user, your initiator of the response, all of these people need to be aligned. The feedback mechanism needs to be continuously going between them. This strengthens ties and increases the risk, but it also increases the risk to investments. How so? Because once the ties are increased, what will happen is you are too dependent on one particular organization. If a VUCA factor like supply chain, geopolitical uprising, some sort of economic recession, these suddenly come into play, or some bad PR, bad publicity comes into play, then your investments, if they are hedged in one particular direction, they may actually land you in trouble. So, it also means that you must have enough options ready, which is what we are talking about here when we are talking about adapting and being safeguarded. Now, specific investments are tailored expenditures for a value chain partner. So, for example, you have got customized systems like we have been speaking of, and training for staff, for people who are going to be the end users for this. This helps that particular organization entrench its association with you. What are the benefits? You improve the efficiency, you increase the adoption and the effectiveness of how they are using that particular software, that particular product, that particular system, that service, and there may be high initial costs, because you will have to customize and you will also have to train people. But over time you will see that the lifetime value of that particular association is far greater than the initial costs. And contractually what you can do is you have a potential lock-in. The lock-ins are a contractual way to ensure that once both parties agree that yes, these are the people we are likely to associate with, they lock themselves in the contract, so that it is beneficial to both. It makes business sense for the supplier, and it makes the supply side clearer for the customer. And in terms of other risks, customers always keep switching costs because if their buyers are vulnerable to hold up, especially for example, recently we saw chipsets being blocked because of geopolitical reasons. There was some issues in the Suez Canal, a tanker overturned, and because of that there were supply chain issues as well. Then there was geopolitical strife, there were economic considerations, and oil prices also went up. So, all of it together started to impact the supply of semiconductors, supply of microchips. So, the kind of hold up which was there, because all of these were getting manufactured in one location, were causing that particular hold up to happen. Now, if that supply chain had been distributed in more than one country, what would have happened is, if you can't source from one location, you shift it to the other location and probably still be able to ensure that you are delivering. On the customer side, we have seen these risks. On the supplier side, you will have to dedicate assets and you will also have to add knowledge to it, which is investment on one side, and the other part is it increases your vulnerability, because what if somebody learns from you and goes out and starts competing against you. So, this could be a problem, because an auto supplier, for example, working with an OEM faces the risk to its intellectual property during the collaboration. They have created a part. That part is their intellectual property, but once it is exposed, somebody may reverse engineer and create it for maybe a lesser price. They have invested all the research, they have developed it from scratch. Their patents would have cost them a certain sum in research, but somebody else who has reverse engineered it, they will actually bear the benefits out of it, because it is already made, it works, it is proven. So, all they have to do is create the technology again all over, and then they will benefit from this. So, this is something which exposes the intellectual property in risk. What can help cover this is contractual obligations, and you make it binding so that you are safe from any sort of incursion of this variety. Now, there is certain amount of opportunism as well. People like to take advantage of the other. How does this happen? Let us say you have said, I will provide you with X number of a certain item, but you undersupply it. Then your contract gets breached and you cheat, you fudge the numbers, and then the final numbers are not met, and your customer thinks that they have received everything, but at the final moment they find out that they have been duped. Again, there is active opportunism where deliberate cheating or withholding happens, and then there is passive opportunism where you fail to adapt or meet obligations. So, here the problem is with the receiving party. On the other side, okay, I will give you an example. Peanut Corporation of America had contaminated product which caused a $1 billion recall and a business collapse as well. Over time, you would have seen certain car parts being problematic in cars, and therefore, Honda, Hyundai and a variety of other car makers have had to recall certain cars. Even Maruti Suzuki in India has recalled cars in the past because of faulty parts. The entire act of recalling those particular cars is not only cost intensive, but it also leaves a blemish on the PR of that particular organization, which is an added cost. Then you have to run explanations and explain why you have actually called something back, what you mean to do, and why was the correct piece or the better piece not provided to the public at first go. All of these things add to costs as well. And the impact, like we spoke of, you have to monitor these things before they happen, and resource allocation to control opportunism also has to be deployed. So, both these things add to the entire activity of creating something and add to your cost. That cost is again transferred to the end consumer who is purchasing from you. It keeps your price going up, and automatically your competition, if they are more nimble than you are, then they will have an advantage at the price point against you. How do you mitigate risks and the opportunism that you have seen so far. Joint ventures become a solution in this case. These are useful when you have got high asset specificity. You have a very, very defined patented kind of input, carburetor or or an engine or a fuel injection system for cars example. Again, your specific salts which go into prescription drugs. So, all of these things are very, very specific, they are scientific, they are of a certain caliber, they are marked, tested and only then provided. So, here if you are doing a joint venture, it takes the opportunism part and it also reduces the risk because it is shared between both organizations, and where at times it is difficult to monitor the supplier behavior. Let us say you are importing lithium from a faraway country. At that point in time, you will want to ensure that the amount of lithium that you are importing is the correct amount, the grade of lithium which you are getting is the right grade. So, if you do a joint venture with the organization there, then you will have staff, you will have quality control over there positioned, ensuring that the entire supply chain does not get affected. And these have to have a future focus in these collaborations. So, how do you do this? You create a long term outlook and you also create certain bonding. So, that blocks the opportunism, and you build solidarity norms and you shift the focus to joint benefits, because it is a win-win game. When it becomes a win-win, both parties are interested in keeping it that way. They will ensure that timely deliveries happen, quality does not suffer. So, the passive part of opportunism is taken care of, and because both parties benefit from the entire exercise, nobody is interested in actively jeopardizing that particular bond. So, the active opportunism is also blocked. So, both active and passive opportunism are blocked using joint ventures and collaborations. Now, when you look at institutional markets, because all organizations buying from organizations and organizations selling to organizations constitute institutional markets. All these organizations will be referred as institutions. So, in such markets, you will have lots of players which are businesses up unto themselves. So, you will have schools, you will have hospitals, you have nursing homes, you have got prisons, and the list keeps going on. This is beyond and above factories and manufacturing units, etc. And here you will see that they may have at times low budgets and they have captive clientele, because like in a school, students are fixed. Once they have paid fees, they are inside and they are studying for that particular term or the year. Similarly, when you look at the considerations for certain markets like this, you will see that buying objectives are not at times only driven by profit. They are also trying to keep up their reputation, they are trying to keep up that particular persona of theirs in society at large, and they manage this by minimizing the cost implications, and while they do so, they ensure that the service quality is always at a top notch level. So, vendors need to adapt their offerings. For example, Heinz tailored their ketchup packaging for certain institutes. Maybe they did it in a co-branded way, maybe they did it in a way that it gave them specific packaging which was useful in their scenarios. So, in a variety of ways, these collaborations can help create better bonds when you look at institutional markets. Then there are government markets, because at times the government itself becomes an institution which is buying in bulk from a particular service provider. Here the roles and processes come into play. You have got the government as a major buyer of goods and services at times, and their procurement is very, very protocol based. So, it often involves bids with contracts which are awarded to lowest bidder. At times quality and price have a tussle and price tends to win. Quality at times may not always be the best thing that can get you through with that particular bid, and vendors with superior quality or timely delivery at times again can win, depending on the clauses inside of that particular contract and the sensitivity of that particular project which they are trying to engage in. There will be special cases also where contracts are negotiated, for example, if something requires a certain amount of R&D. So, there will be complex projects which will have that R&D cost involved in it, and there will be scenarios where there are low competition scenarios. So, therefore, it fosters the need for an R&D because you are almost creating something which is new. The COVID scenario presented that kind of a situation where AstraZeneca and Serum Institute of India, they collaborated. There was R&D which was done by AstraZeneca, the production was done by Serum Institute of India. So, there were complex projects, the vaccine for COVID had to be maintained at a certain temperature, the input formula was given by AstraZeneca, and SII did a lot in producing it at a mass scale. And even here there were certain approvals required, for which the government also became a certain party to the entire activity. In return, what the government got from them was dibs on how much of the vaccine the government could take. It would purchase it, but at a certain cost, and that would then be at the government's prerogative to use, whether they sell it, whether they distribute it to the population in India, or whether they send it to other countries as aid. So, that was the prerogative which the government then exercised on this. So, a lot of scenarios like this also happen, and governments become a major player in these particular scenarios. Mining, natural resources, environmental issues, etc., are spaces where the government necessarily becomes a part of certain things like this. Also, infrastructure development is one major space where you can find the government getting in as a market player, and there are lots of challenges in that as well. So, there is extensive bureaucracy, there is a lot of paperwork, and there are procurement staff changes because people keep moving and keep getting posted and reshuffled, and you have to justify almost everything in that particular cost you are providing. And from the vendor side, you have to actually demonstrate that it has a certain bottom line impact, because of which you are asking for a certain cost. And you have to showcase past performance via case studies of what you have already done to merit that particular contract. And you have to follow detailed guidelines, because the government exacts a very big toll if you move away from their legal compliances. So, it could lead to terrible complications for an organization. There are certain reforms which are happening in the new age ways of working in government. There are certain times things are bought off the shelf. For example, India bought certain Rafales off the shelf, fully ready await to fly condition from France, and online communication is now encouraged to reduce paperwork, which is also part of the government's manifestos at various points in time, and they debrief the losing vendors why they lost out, and so therefore, future bids can improve, because now they know how to provide better services at a more reasonable cost and thereby win future bids. So, the whole process again becomes transparent, and these are all factors through which governments, especially honest and ones which have got complete transparency, they promote the entire competitive spirit, thereby getting better bids from better vendors. There are web based tools. Even in India, you will see that GEM is a particular website on which all the government tenders come out, and they have direct links between buyers and suppliers, and they are streamlining the purchase of various goods. You have got the GSA which connects agencies with suppliers, and again you have got to register in the system for award management for federal procurement opportunities. These are both US examples. In India, you have got the GEM portal through which all government contracting and procurement tends to happen through tenders. And now, let us jump into the Southern Pumps case study, which is a tendering exercise which happened, and this will actually help you craft the entire worldview about how the tendering process would work. Now, Southern Pumps is a public tender which happened. This was sometime in the late 20th century. Now, here what happened was there was a tendering for a borehole pump which was to be done at the South Coast Water Board. This was in the UK, and historically what happened was the competition of southern pumps were other British pump makers who had similar listing prices because it was pretty much commoditized. Now, the challenge which came up was a local pump installer came up and they wanted to seek the quote for the entire contract. So, this would comprise of pump, the control gear and the installation of the project. Traditionally, they would get a 15% discount from southern pumps, and they used to quote a list price to the water board as well. So, it was very transparent that way. Now, in terms of competition, what happened was there was price cutting which started to happen, because foreign pumps entered the fray through a distributor, and that started disrupting the entire customary discount structures. The 15% just went out of the window, and this created a dilemma for southern pumps. What happened was that disruption was from a price cutting competitor, and there at that point in time Southern's main focus was selling pumps profitably. They were not ready to take the hit because the contract or the value was such, but they were in a certain stage of evolution where they could not take that kind of a financial hit, and they wanted reselling control gear and installation work. These were not their first primary priorities, these were secondary priorities. So, they had these things in mind. The contract value, the total contract value was nearly 4 times the pump's value, and this highlighted the potential for setting up an installation department. And in terms of maintaining relationships, you wanted to avoid offense to the local installer, and this remained crucial due to their valued business relationship. They still wanted to continue getting business from that local installer. So, here what happened was they had to remove the old steam pump plant, and they had to supply a borehole pump which would give 40,000 gallons an hour at a 300-foot head, and the supply, the installation of motor control gear, valves, pipes, cables and remote control capabilities were all part of the entire project. Now, evaluation would have happened on lowest price emphasized by a non-technical committee. Now, these people are not technical, they are just going to look, maybe they are just accountants. So, they are looking only at the cost aspect of it. They do not understand enough of the engineering which goes into pumping as a process. So, the preference was again for pump manufacturers as primary contractors and subcontracting for the installation as well. Now, what they looked internally and found that Southern's pumps are of high quality, but they are more expensive than the competitors because it was a foreign product coming in, and their pump type probably was at this kind of 950 pounds as a list price. The gear etc. would call them another 840 pounds, and dismantling of the earlier installation and putting this up would run them short by another 1750 pounds. So, the total estimates was about 3540 pounds. And in terms of competition, they were meeting John Smithers and company, who expected 10% lower pump price, and local installer who they wanted to partner with. They still wanted that 15% discount, but they were risking losing to Smithers because of the total bid value, because automatically the moment the pump price comes down, the entire bid cost also comes down. So, they had to actually look at reliability as a perception. The chief water engineer at that point in time, Mr. Parker, they had doubts about the type Q pumps due to a past failure which was linked to installation errors actually. So, they acknowledged no issues with the pump over the last 3 years and found that there was a satisfactory performance with other Southern pumps models. And in terms of Parker's influence, what he did was he was going to become the chief water engineer of the enlarged water board, and JB, which had an essential customer contributing 10,000 pounds annually, including spares and replacements, was vying for this. So, the growth opportunity for Southern was that with the upcoming board merger, which was giving that larger water board, they could increase the pump demand by tenfold. which means they could not lose out on this opportunity. They had to somehow bag it. So, with that particular strategic goal, they secured the current tender without alienating JB Sussex and mitigated the risk from John Smithers' competitive pricing. How they did that was, with limited resources for dismantling and installation, they reduced the cost there, and since the supply pumps were preferred, so JB was given that particular order to avoid complexities, because they wanted to have that long standing relationship. What were the next steps? They strengthened the trust with Parker by addressing the reliability concerns. Now, he was a technical person, so they gave him the fact that the pumps themselves were not a problem. The installation being done wrongly was a cause for concern, and that had caused the pumps not to perform at peak performance level. And they developed a competitive pricing strategy without jeopardizing the quality or the relationships. So, they managed to tweak every single aspect. They got their supplier happy, they got the person who was the user to feel safe buying from them, because they had enough of a story technically to prove their point. They ensured that they were also aligned with the particular individual taking that call, because they wanted to get that assignment for upcoming pump orders from the enlarged water board, which was coming in from the merger. So, all of these factors together helped Southern Pumps move ahead. Now, with this, we will come to a close of this particular conversation. Going further, we will close the entire business marketing segment. We will recap the key points we have learnt, and a couple of case studies will be discussed in the forthcoming conversation, so that you can have a very thorough understanding of business markets and how to deal with them, especially in the light of VUCA circumstances. It is important to do this, because going further, we will start getting into consumer marketing, which is more vast in its understanding and scope, and that needs to be delved into with a fine tooth comb. So, hence, with that particular objective in mind, we will move to the next communication in the series, which will be segment 14 of the entire course. That is all for today. Thank you so much for being a lovely audience.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. We usually know William Shakespeare as the most revered figure in the history of English literature. But we often tend to forget that he has also been one of the most hated figures in literature. And here I am not talking only about those boys and girls who have to memorize long sections from Macbeth or King Lear or Julius Caesar before they can go and sit for their school or college exams. But I am also talking about people who are themselves quite famous authors. Tolstoy, for instance, considered the writings of Shakespeare to be, and I quote, crude, immoral, vulgar, and senseless. George Bernard Shaw absolutely loathed Shakespeare, as he did Homer. But perhaps no other criticism about Shakespeare is more damaging than the one which says that Shakespeare is a marvelous storyteller, provided someone has told him the story earlier. Now, this piece of criticism is particularly damaging because it is true. None of Shakespeare's plays contain any original story whatsoever. They are all written using pre-existing materials, pre-existing stories. Now, does that diminish the stature of Shakespeare as a dramatist? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.